I'm Jane Alexander. I'm president and CEO of the Community Foundation for Mississippi. The big backstory was that the summer of the pandemic, I received a phone call from Microsoft Corporation to say, would you be willing to work with us exploring the state of local journalism in Mississippi? And we said yes, and that led to an extended partnership also with the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. And as we went down this path, we recognized that it was not going to be really productive to focus only on traditional journalism sources, but to really start to ask questions about ways that traditional journalism and non-traditional journalism, but still journalism, can be effective and can try to make space for people to create change in their communities. We all know that the traditional journalism business model has been under threat for really several decades. I think that the rise of social media has just made that more challenging. And I think the biggest question for us and for the funders that we work with is what are ways to build trust in sources and places that people are going to go to get information? How can we take what we know about that and apply it perhaps to a new business model, but certainly to a new way of doing work? So welcome everybody. I will turn it over to, I forget who am I turning this over to Sophie. So thank y'all for being here today.
Thanks everyone. I am Sophie McNeil-Wolf. I'm the Director of Communications and Data here at CFM, and we're glad to have all of you today. And of course, we're also recording this. That'll get sent out later. So if you have people that are interested, we will have a recording later that'll go up online, and we'll email out a link to all of you. And we're glad to see all of you here and that you are interested in some level. As Jane mentioned, we have been working on this project for some time, and Red Window really came to the table with us about a year ago. Last fall, we were starting to kind of come up with these questions that you've seen us in some of our communications about, can journalism bring people together in Mississippi, and what would that mean for our state? And so we've been mulling over some ideas, and what was interesting was when we landed on this idea of constructive journalism. And Lucy is going to go through that today. We'll really just kind of tee up some of the research that we've been doing over this last year. And we want to hear from you. We want to hear about your thoughts, how you think maybe this could work in your world, or do you think that there's too many obstacles? We even want to hear that. So I also want to encourage everybody in the chat to tell us who you are and where you're from. There'll be people from across the state of Mississippi in this group. So we'd love to hear from you. And also throughout this time that we have, if you have questions, put those in the chat. I'll be moderating. And then also at the end, we'll certainly have time for plenty of conversation. So feel free to always put a question in the chat if it comes up. And so I will be throwing those out if they make sense during the presentation, but then of course at the end as well. So I want to introduce Lucy. Lucy's really going to be doing most of this presentation today. So if you have any questions, we're here to help.
Thank you, Sophie. We're just so excited to be with you, and thank you so much for making time. I know you all are busy. So what we'd like to do here is take about 9 months worth of work and condense it into something that will make good use of your time. I'm here with my colleague, Kelly Hunsberger. I want to make sure to introduce Kelly. You might recognize her last name. Her late father, George, was the publisher at the Clarion-Ledger for many years. So for our team, this project has been similar to some of the types of research projects that we do, but also really different in that we have a really deep personal investment in this topic. I spent 13 years in community journalism here in Oxford, Mississippi. So that's really the first big piece of my career. And I understand how hard it is to do what you do every day. And just coming from a place of respecting your work as journalists in our state. So just know that where we're coming from, along with our partners at the Community Foundation, is really knowing the power that journalism can have, and also really wanting to see our media outlets survive and thrive and do your good work in this state. So Sophie mentioned the question that we've been looking at: can journalism bring people together in Mississippi? And we want to offer this as an idea toward that question using a method called constructive journalism. So I'm going to take 1 second and share my screen. I did design this as a visual presentation. I know we have some folks who've let me know that they're driving today, so I'll try to describe also what we're seeing as well. Give me 1 second. Okay. All right, can everybody see this? Terrific. So just to get started, as a nutshell definition of constructive journalism as we have been researching it, it is a new role for journalism as a facilitator of civic dialogue in democratic societies. So I think for a lot of us who've worked in journalism, we would both look at that definition as similar to what we do, but also a little bit different from how we think about our role. So let's talk through what this looks like. What I'm showing is a visualization from the Constructive Institute based in Denmark. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about this group next. But what does constructive journalism look like? So you can see at the top of this visualization that the focus is really journalism for tomorrow. So when I talk to folks who were in journalism with me, a lot of the conversation is about what used to be, but this is definitely a forward-looking effort to orient journalism in a way that really makes it thrive into the future. The ambition to contribute to democracy through critical, constructive journalism. So those words critical and constructive being at play at the same time, and also this intention around the role that journalism can have in democracy. So we first looked at this, this visualization with these 3 pillars of constructive journalism. And I think we didn't fully understand what they meant. So I want to walk through this with you from our lens of having been in this topic for a few months now. So the 3 pillars would be focus on solutions, not only exposing problems, but also looking for possible solutions. This one is very similar to how we think about solutions journalism in America, which I think most of us are more familiar with if we've been in this field. The second one, cover nuances, strive for the best attainable version of the truth, and see the world with both eyes. So the important piece to me and the difference in how I might be thinking as a journalist is not just covering both sides of a story, but also really looking for those shades of gray in between. And then finally, promote democratic conversation, engage and facilitate debate, including people in the community. This is one where I almost feel like that word debate can get lost in translation, because I was thinking first really about candidates debate. That's really was the image in my mind. But I think the point is more civic dialogue, and definitely much broader than just the idea of how we would host a candidate debate. It's a much bigger idea than that. And I think the main thing that we've learned through this process has just been that if you remove one of these pillars from this idea, it doesn't work the same. So that's one of the, so we're really looking at these 3 pillars and how they all can fit together at the same time. So where's this coming from? These kind people in Denmark have given us their time and attention, and allowed us to check in with them along the course of this project. This is Ulrich and Sonara. The Constructive Institute is based at a university in Denmark. It's only got started about 2017, I think, and so it's still a fairly young institute. They have been working a lot in Europe, obviously, and then increasingly in other parts of the world. They, a couple of years ago, established sort of another center in Germany, in Bonn, and then quite recently have opened another branch in Australia. So they're in the season of being interested in taking these ideas out into the broader world. Some of the things that they do at this Constructive Institute are they bring in working journalists, they're to Denmark, and they work with them over time to provide training, and then let those folks go back into their organizations and implement the ideas. They also have master classes and fellowships. There's a lot of things that are happening in Europe. Obviously, the Atlantic is kind of a big barrier for a lot of us here in the States. but this is kind of what this is looking like over there in Europe. So the main thing we wanted to find out, how are these ideas being implemented? What does this actually look like on the ground? And so we really noticed 4 different levels at which news organizations are implementing these ideas. So starting from the simplest, and I really related to this, having done a lot of reporting myself, is just this intention within an individual reporter, how you want to craft that story, and even just asking one more question in your interview. Not just how people disagree, but what is it that you do agree on, or what could be done differently? So engaging sources in a constructive way. We also found and want to share with you a number of special projects that look like these sort of standalone efforts that go beyond that everyday coverage. And I think those, because they're kind of easy to capture, show you what these examples can look like on the ground in really unique ways. There are outlets at which they are integrating constructive questions into every editorial conversation. So as part of planning the story that they're going to be working on, there's a conversation in the newsroom about how can we approach this from a constructive point of view. And then finally, there are organizations that have taken this idea and really implemented it all throughout their organization. And you can imagine that that is a really big project that takes a lot of time. But we have observed and seen some examples that it's really only something that can start with leadership. So it's not actually, it would be more of a short-term impact for individual reporters to decide that they want to work differently. As we know, newsrooms turn over, and it's one of the biggest challenges that we face in the media. But when you have this sort of systematic change, that's when that impact can be more long-lasting. So those are the different levels. So I want to walk you through some examples that we found. There were lots of examples we looked at, but we've really chosen the ones that we hoped would be most interesting and feel most relevant to here in Mississippi. This was a very interesting example. So this started in Germany. The headline here is Germany Talks. And what this newsroom did is they used the software and they had people sign up to be matched with somebody from the opposite political viewpoint, just to get together and have a one-on-one conversation. And what they did was, so they're actually initiating this interaction. And then when people in the newsroom saw a pairing that they thought would be interesting, they would contact those folks and ask them, can we come to your meeting and cover your conversation? So what's interesting about that is that there were apparently lots of these conversations that took place that were not covered. So there was still, this news outlet saw value even in just the facilitation of that interaction, but also they wanted to cover it as well. So this is a project that's been replicated in a lot of different places, and you can look it up. It's called My Country Talks. This was an interesting example I wanted to share with you, just because of the arc of how they went about reporting this story was different from how I would have thought to do it. This is a feminist online magazine in Indonesia. They wanted to talk about sexual education in this very conservative Muslim majority country. How I would have thought to do that is I would have probably started with an angle and gather the research and gather the quotes to fill out that story. What they did instead was they started with the audience. So they asked their teenage followers what questions they had, and they organized the reporting around the questions that their audience was asking. They did do a survey so that they could have objective data to work with, but they brought together, again, initiating this facilitation of a roundtable discussion among, let's say, a youth activist, a health advocate, family planning agency, an Islamic scholar, teacher, parent, a teenager. So they're actually bringing together these different perspectives, creating that event and covering it. So that was how they approached this topic. Hang on. We thought this was hilarious. Solved or Squeezed. This was a TV station over in Denmark. These folks, one of the challenges, of course, with producing, what we think of as good news is that sometimes good news can be boring. If you don't have the conflict, it is less interesting. So what they were trying to do is figure out how to create an interaction among these policymakers or folks running for office that would be constructive but also fun to watch. And they stole some ideas from like their reality TV shows that they had been watching. And the idea they came up with was to put 4 politicians together in a shrinking room and gave them 20 minutes to solve a problem together. And what was interesting, in addition to it being fun to watch, is that they actually were able to solve a problem. There was a particular issue about elder care, and they actually did make progress in that 20 minutes. And then the newsroom went back and covered the outcome of the program that they came up with and what happened. But this was an important point that they made. They thought we wanted them to disagree and fight with each other. We really had to make them believe that we wanted the opposite. Anyway. Okay, so next one we looked at, this was a way to do a town hall debate, which I think we're all familiar with that format, but they reversed it. So they put the folks running for office in the audience, and they put regular people on the stage, and they had the politicians in the audience raise their hand to ask questions of the ordinary people. So it's just this sort of reversal and elevation of the perspectives of just everyday people. Let's see. So yeah, so they were really, this was totally an experiment. And I think that was something that we were interested in as well. Just the experimental nature of the kinds of projects that people are doing under this umbrella. Okay, so those were some standalone projects that we wanted to show you just to kind of illustrate the picture. So we also found 2 different models of outlets that we related more to. I mean, a lot of these outlets they're working with are like the BBC, and I think that's hard for us to relate to here at our scale in a place like Mississippi. But we found these 2 examples of organizations that are fleshing this out. So the first one we want to share with you is called Greater Govanhill. They are covering a neighborhood in Glasgow, Scotland, and it has a bad reputation. And so there was this perspective from inside that community that there were more positive things happening that were being covered. So they kind of took ownership of their story in this way. So the founder, she went around asking people on the ground, what kind of outlet they would want. And so I think the platforms that they're using are mainly a website, as well as a monthly or I think it's a monthly magazine, and they have a podcast as well. So some of the examples, they've also recycled this idea, My Country Talks, at their level, where they're connecting local people, in their case, people who speak different primary languages. There's a lot of immigrants in this community. They have a radio show that is led and hosted by the refugees, where they're telling their own story. And then they have this column that they do, Life Before Govanhill, where the folks in the neighborhood are just telling their own stories of how they got there. And yeah, so you can see a big part of what they were doing is not only bringing journalists into that community, but equipping the people who live there to be able to work like journalists. So they have seem to have a very open approach to how they're going about doing that. They also were able to open this community newsroom that allows people to come together in real life. I think that's something that we've seen in a lot of these, again, providing space for people to interact in real life. We did ask them about their funding model and how this is supported, and it is a nonprofit. And it looks like memberships, as well as obviously grants, and they do advertising in the print magazine. So I hope you can see the visuals for this publication were so cool. We wanted to share them with you. Okay, so, oh gosh, I have to remember how to pronounce this. Midtjyllands Avis. We wanted to share, this is the other example of a full organization that has adopted this way of working. We had a good conversation with the journalist over there, Brian Holst, who's been overseeing this transition this is actually a group of 3 newspapers that are operating. They're in Denmark. And this was you can see the visual of, this is from his presentation, is showing this fire burning platform. So he's really depicting the emergency situation that they were in terms of how they were losing subscribers, dealing with aging readership, losing ad dollars. And so they've seen their circulation go from 20,000 to less than 10,000. So that was a big shift. I mean, I think it's all a familiar story for a lot of us. And they came to this from a place of desperation. We need to do something. And so what they did was they sent this guy, Brian Holst, for 3 months to the Constructive Institute. So again, taking him out of actively being involved in a media organization, plugging him in at the Constructive Institute for 3 months to be able to access that kind of in-depth training, and then sending him back to implement these ideas in a way that made sense for their outlet. So this was really cool. And this really connected with what I would need in order to practice this kind of work on the ground. Because when you're out reporting a story, you don't need to also be reinventing the wheel at the same time. We don't have time to do that. So what they actually developed was this format book, and he sent it to us and translated it for us so that we can see what they've got. But they've created 18 different types of reporting models in stories. So if you are a working journalist in this organization, you have this as a resource where you can understand, okay, here's the topic I'm trying to cover. Here's the format that might work well for that, where I can use these constructive ideas, but I'm not reinventing the wheel because we just don't have time for that. So they've got, you can see these sort of blue icons that are visuals both for the editorial staff, but also for the audience. So when they publish these types of stories, they're putting these little icons on those stories and really training the audience to look for these types of stories. This was really cool. One thing they realized was that most of their audience didn't know most of their journalists or didn't know their names. And so they've really put their journalists forward in their branding and their marketing. I think that a lot of us would recognize that when you have stability in your staff, that's a lot easier to do. When you have a lot of turnover, that's a lot harder. But they really made the journalists, the focus of who they are as a brand and put them out there, including like in ad campaigns. They also continue, in the same way, organize events. So not just covering events, but taking the initiative to create the kinds of events that they want to cover. A lot of that obviously happens more easily when you have partner organizations that you're doing that with. This was interesting because he talked about how they were able to integrate both in what we would say as investigative journalism or critical coverage alongside with some of these constructive ideas. So they were doing this at the same time. It's not just bad news or good news. It's all happening at once. So not just reporting what went wrong and why, but also what can we learn from this and how can we make it better? And what he said was, we must ask the hard questions and look over the shoulders of those in power. At the same time, we're solution-oriented and want to give those in power inspiration. And that kind of resonated with me because it's not necessarily how I would have thought about working. But they have had, they are using this power in their community to affect change. And so they've seen some of those outcomes through their reporting and how they're doing it. This is pretty impressive. He went over last fall in order to get this training, and they started this effort at the beginning of this calendar year. And they've over the first half of the year, they produced more than 300 constructive stories. And what they're seeing is more engagement. And they're also seeing more interest from young journalists and seeing that their own journalists are more engaged and happier in their work. So this is still a really new effort, and they're actively want to look at additional outcomes, obviously. But, he was describing to me this observation of how engaged their own team is and that they're getting this interest from young people in what they're doing. Yeah, so, and then in terms of their outlook, they've maintained subscriptions while they've also raised the price of those subscriptions, but they also, have lost ad revenue. So that's not solving this problem yet. They really are focused on reaching more young readers and including putting more young people in their stories. So that's kind of their growth that they're looking for. So I wanted to share with you just from our observations, and we're not experts in this, but from what we have seen so far, these are some of the things that we're still looking to fill in. First and foremost, obviously the business case, that's the biggest question. We want to know not just engagement, but how does this work in the numbers to help our organizations survive and thrive in a different way. This tension between good news and boring news, and how you continue to solve for that. That is definitely a focus, and so you can see people are needing to be more creative in order to make that happen. One of the biggest obstacles, obviously, is when you're looking at quality versus clicks. So there are conversations around how to move the goalpost for what you're trying to do. If the goal remains getting the most clicks, the most eyeballs, then it's really hard to shoot for quality, because sometimes those things are not the same. And then finally, just the distance. And we're still looking for ways to get involved with this as Americans on the other side of the Atlantic. And I mentioned they are also reaching out to other parts of the world. So, but we do see, in terms of access to in-person training, that is something that that is an obstacle for us because we're over here. Okay, so this is, again, a visual from the Constructive Institute that can just contrast the method to breaking news and investigative journalism. And I think what we were looking at it from that sort of contrast perspective at the beginning, but I think we really see, after looking at all these examples, it's really just about this additional dimension. So it's not replacing the kind of work that we've been doing. It's really just adding this additional layer. And the investigative work is still very much a part of what we need to do. This is not just about good news. That's part of it, but that is not what this is about. And again, we see the relationship to solutions journalism. A lot of those points in terms of being forward-looking, looking for inspiration, finding those solutions and best practice, a lot of that overlaps, but that facilitator role we feel like is different. So at this point, I'm going to take a sip of water, and I would love just some feedback from this audience on some of these or questions that you have and big picture comments. Do we have some questions or comments?
We don't have any in the chat, but if anybody wants to unmute and ask a question, you're more than welcome to, or if you are more comfortable typing in the chat, that's okay as well. Okay. Would you like me to keep going?
Do you have any thoughts on being able to go into this constructive journalism route, but not necessarily being stuck in the optimistic, just, I guess, pitfall where you want to maintain a journalistic integrity there, but still try to look into the future and what can be done?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Kobe. I think that, yeah, we've been looking at that a lot actually, because I think, you know, we do have that desire to see the positive news, but the journalistic integrity piece, yeah, that's essential. So I think it kind of comes back to those three pillars and activating all of those at the same time. So, and that idea of being constructive and critical at the same time, to me, is really what it boils down to.
And Lucy, we've had several questions in the chat about the facilitator role, and people want to kind of dive into that a little more, explain how is that different, and what is that, and how do we see that play out?
Yeah, I think, well, to me, the example, it is different to, like, if an event was happening in our town and I were going to go and cover that event, that would be normal to me in terms of how I would work. But the creation of these situations for people to interact. So, for example, the outlet in Indonesia that I described, how they brought those different perspectives together to the table, and then covered it. That to me is what that facilitator role is about. It's more initiative in creating the opportunities for people to have these conversations. And I think it's also, for me, you know, it's like kind of a more humble role. Like even today, I mean, I'm so far from having all the answers for you guys. You know, I can bring this to you, but being able to fill in, look for solutions, while at the same time having this openness toward what you don't already know, and helping to extract those ideas, including from places that you may not naturally be looking for them, just, you know, among everyday people, for example. But yeah, I would love to unpack that more with you guys and see, you know, just observe with you the times that you have felt like a facilitator. I know that for me as a journalist, I remember those situations where I really was aware I'm the only one listening to both sides. They are not listening to each other. And so you are in the middle of a lot of these contentious situations.
I had a comment, I guess a comment, just sort of thinking through this. It's interesting because I guess I keep going back to, like, this is definitely a noble goal and something we should try to, you know, incorporate into our reporting. I'm just thinking about like the reality of the job and resources. So like for me, you know, just this week I published a story about the OBGYN shortage, particularly in one area of the state. I have a solution story that I'm wanting to write about, like family medicine physicians who practice obstetrics and nurse midwives and stuff like that. But sometimes it's like by the time I get to doing that, the next issue has already arisen that needs immediate attention. Same thing with another project that a colleague's working on. You know, she's got a story planned out for solutions, like ways other states handle situations. It's just getting to it and figuring out how to report on the facts of what's going on first, so people are understanding that this is happening, you know, or this is, and then having the resources and the time for this type of, you know, solutions / constructive.
Thank you, Kate. I don't think there's any question that the idea of adding more work to anybody's plate, you know, is an easy task. You know, if you're producing work like you're describing, you're just trying to keep up. And no, I think that's really true. I think it's more like, okay, so what resources would be needed in order to add that additional capability? So some of the things that they have done are like adding a constructive editor into a newsroom. Again, a lot of this depends on the size of your organization. I was in a very small newsroom. I can't imagine having an additional person who's only working like this. But yeah, you could have have someone who really owns that and is working with the folks who are covering these different areas to add that dimension. You know, yeah, that's one example where you could have a constructive reporter, and that is what they do. So it's really more about, yeah, there's a big gap in terms of resources. What's the best way to fill it? That's what we're looking at. Thank you. Maybe one more, and then I want to move on because I want to share what we heard from the Mississippi audience. Maybe one more question. Anybody else?
I'd be curious. You know, we've been at the Free Presses. We kind of we embraced solutions journalism a number of years ago, and I actually think I was at a solutions summit with with the folks from Constructive Journalism. But I know within solutions journalism world, there have been a lot of lessons learned and embraced that are talked openly about, especially around how we're seeking out solutions and from whom, and how we're covering inclusive communities and ensuring that the work and the dialogue, which we fully agree with this approach, and gave up doing panel discussions years ago because we want to hear from the people, right? But what are the lessons learned about how to do a better job within the paradigm of reaching more inclusive audiences and bringing more people to the table?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Donna. And I think that's one of the main things that we've wanted to get more of are some of those examples. I think there's a lot of this seems to be happening also in in-person gatherings that are hard for us to access. So one thing, I mean, some feedback that we would have for this group is we want to be able to access more of those kinds of resources from a distance and within our schedules. So no, I definitely, yeah, I agree. This is something that we want to see built out more, and and maybe contribute to as well. From our context is just so different than a big European city. It's really not where we are. So I think we in Mississippi, because of the way we're so connected, we would have, to me, a lot to offer in this conversation as well. Yeah, that's how I'm thinking of it.
And to piggyback off what Donna said, it occurs to me, really looking at the Germany model, the reason that may work so well is because those people are more monolithic, and it could also feel unsafe to a more culturally or in a more diverse community, because those are maybe some vastly different backgrounds. Because I think if they look like one another, they may move in the world like one another, and this is the one thing that they may not agree on.
I'm not sure that's true. In that there is, in a place like Germany, you've had so much, immigration. I mean, I think yeah, we are, particular here in Mississippi with our history, but I mean, German history is pretty complicated too. And, yeah, there's a lot of tensions among different ethnicities. At least we all speak the same language. We actually have a number of advantages, over some of these places where, people can't even communicate. So I'm not sure I agree with that perspective. But thank you, Kimberly. Let me just walk through, because I have more to share, and I really want to unpack with you what we heard when the most important part of this, really listening to our audience here in Mississippi. We spent a good bit of time trying to hear from a diverse group, snapshot of people around our state from different communities, different racial backgrounds, different experiences. This is not a perfect scientific survey, but we were really trying to sort of fill in all those demographic points so that we could really listen deeply to our audience members here in Mississippi. And we want to bring you some of the findings from that piece of this research. We talked to people who follow the media a lot, and also to people who would tell us, they really tune out, or they're intentionally limiting, or just not interested in the news. But we did ask them about how the relationship with the media has changed. I don't think any of this would be surprising necessarily to this audience, but people definitely described how their relationship with the news has changed over the past 10 or 15 years. to being turned off by negativity. That experience of sort of pop-up instant news like we get with notifications. People talked about the decline in their local newspaper and shifting platforms. I used to get the news in print. Now I podcasts work better for me because I'm on the move. Things like that we heard. And then we did hear, like, people shared with us these really specific stories about how they made a decision to limit how much news they were taking into their mind. A lot of this was for mental health reasons. And so just recognizing that the level of negativity was overwhelming and affecting their mental health, and really making a choice about what they wanted to see or read or not. And also making a choice based on, is what I'm reading true? There's so much junk out there. How can I narrow this down to what I think is actually real or true? This was an interesting question. We asked people about where they get their news today. And if you can see this chart, this is just 20 people and all the different outlets that they mentioned. We did hear Mississippi Today a lot. But yeah, and again, this is a small group, but to illustrate the point that it's all over the place, and people get their news from lots of different outlets, as we're all aware. Definitely people did mention what we would think of as own media channels from their local governments or their elected officials, that's part of what they think of as their news intake. We did ask them about the platforms that they prefer to use, and you can see a lot of people responding about social media. People mentioned getting emails, getting the news emailed to them. We did just notice, I thought this was interesting, people talking about interacting with they say their local newspaper, but they're not actually subscribing. What they're talking about is they see that news on Facebook. And then likewise, we heard people who don't have TV, don't watch TV, but they're interacting with their local TV station on their app. So just that, just following people to the platforms where they are with these news brands. It's not always what you would expect. We asked people what kinds of stories they follow and share. And so there were, of course, lots of answers to this question. We did hear a lot of interest in, what's going on in my community, positive news, local human interest stories. So we heard some of those things that we expected, but we also definitely heard, people want, hard-hitting reporting. They want to know what's real and true, and across all these different topics that they were interested in. This was very interesting to me. We had some conversations about how people know which outlets to trust. And I think we all know that that's a big piece of what people across America are trying to figure out how to solve, is the erosion of trust in the media. And generally speaking, people were describing how much they thought that outlet was objective and not coming from a place where that outlet had an agenda. So they were judging whether or not they could trust the reporting in the context of, does this outlet have an agenda? And then we also heard from a number of people who described, I make sure I read this one, and then I can make my own judgment about what is true. And I was also really interested by the range and how relationships play a part, like in-person relationships play a part in how people determine what they could trust. And so the more sophisticated people seem to be about how things work in the world, they're much more likely to, we had one guy who only looks at primary sources. He's not looking for any other perspective because he's going to make his own judgment. And then down through this scale between people, like the college student I talked to who, she's judging, what do my parents say is true? She might be reading it, but those relationships, she's leaning on her parents to filter that for her. And then all the way through to this statement, the only news we trust is word of mouth. So, in certain communities, that is your trust factor. This is who I trust. So I thought that scale was really interesting. this was interesting because we didn't ask this question, but so many people brought it up. So one of the themes that we saw in this kind of constructive reporting was this idea of reporting from inside the community. And I don't know if you guys relate to this, but here in Oxford, there would be times over our history where, you know, the New York Times would come to town and they would do a big story here, and then they would go back to New York, wherever they came from. And I would you know, talk to a source here. Well, you were quoted in the New York Times, and they said, "Yeah, that's not really what I meant. Like that was out of context." There would be some dimension of that didn't feel true to them. And so that kind of reporting versus reporting that's coming from inside the community, where you're bringing that context. A lot of people mentioned that as having a piece of, you know, why we would trust this to be true, actually knowing the people in the community before you tell the story. Yeah, that was a big thing. Understanding the place, what it's like on the ground, having that context. So people saw a lot of value in that. Yeah, so here were some specific examples that people told us, little stories about how this should work. And yeah, this point about getting to the heart of where crime is taking place to see why it is happening. That challenge of trying to cover that from the outside versus what is actually happening from the inside. And I think we all would appreciate that challenge. And people talked about seeing and knowing the reporters. Like, I see that person in my town, and I'm observing who they're talking to when they're at an event. Who are they interviewing? So there's some observation about just that, again, physical interaction on the ground in the place where you live, and how that influences what you think about this reporting. When we asked people about what stories are not being told, they had a lot of different responses to this. Some of the things we did hear a lot were about wanting to hear more from, not just about, but from people who, everyday people, young people, marginalized people. And then also we heard a number of people say, there's more good stuff happening on the ground in my community than is being reported. So we heard that from different locations. For sure. Let's see. Okay. This again was not a specific question, but I wanted to call this out because I heard this multiple times. Black perspectives on what's missing, and I've really heard this from the folks that we listened to, particularly in the Delta. And the point was that you know, when we're covered, it is this. I mean, frankly, it's the Memphis News coming down and how they're telling the stories about crime that is happening here. But there's so much good happening here. I wish we could tell our own stories. I wish we could reclaim our narrative about what we're doing here, particularly in the Delta. That was something that I heard repeated a couple of times. And Akwete's, I quote, "Who best can tell our stories but us?" So again, that's sort of owning and reclaiming of that narrative. Okay, so again, we asked people how you interact with the news, and then we started getting more into some of these bigger picture questions. And we didn't lead, it's important that you know, we didn't lead with the idea of constructive journalism. We didn't even mention that word until the very end of these interviews. So we just really wanted to be open and hear where people were coming from. But we did ask people, well, can journalism help solve problems? And I think the question was actually, can journalism bring people together and help solve problems in your community? What do you think? And so what was interesting to me is, especially because we've been looking at all these models, is the different opportunities that people saw, including ones that I would never have thought of. So let me get into some of those opportunities that people saw. People pointed to the role of journalism in establishing this baseline of what is happening. So giving us those objective facts that we can work from. That was definitely, and then the context. So again, that's sort of fundamental role that we already relate to. But people also talked about giving them an opportunity to take part in events. So, you know, I know when I was at the paper, that was just part of what we did. You know, we put out there like, this is happening, these sort of local events. But that means a lot to people is what they told us, and giving them an opportunity to get more connected where they live. And then even coverage of, things like, I always used to have to cover the Spring Arts Festival here. And, but even that sort of thing, it makes them feel pride in their community. So giving them that connection and, helping them connect in real life. People talked about how they use what they've read or seen in the news to interact with people in their day and build build relationships through those conversations, and feel like they know what they're talking about. They described like, that makes me feel good. I have something to offer, just in my day, these conversations. Some other things that people saw were, definitely the idea of inspiration. They picked up on that. If you hear you'll be something in life, that there's hope for you to have jobs in the Delta, then people won't leave the Delta. So that piece of what's possible, they did see value on that. And then again, people, two of the people we talked to had been in the Mississippi legislature, and they described how important it is, that pushback that they would get from good journalists when they were in the process of making policy, that was really important in the process of solving problems. So what was interesting to me in this process, and also to a certain extent proved the point, was that I was so excited to hear all these ideas from people, that it was actually the second pass through all the answers that we really started seeing, actually, a lot of people have significant reservations about this. And that was a theme. That was a really important theme of what it could help solve problems, but we don't know that we want it to. A lot of people express it in these different sort of ways. And it really came down to, if that reporter or outlet is going to solve this problem, do they know, do they have this full picture of, I think the point was, you really know what the issue is, what all the solutions could be, and you really understand the situation on the ground and what the solution would cost, and what a special person that is. And as a reporter, that's a really overwhelming idea for me to try to come up with. And then, objectivity being the other question. If they're going to solve problems, I'm not sure they're going to have an agenda built into that. So that hesitation about, I may not want their solution, that solution may be coming from one side or the other. And then this point, I'm using the word grace to kind of sum it up, but is there room for dissent? If we're solving problems, what is that space that we're providing for someone to have a different point of view? So that was sort of how I summed up what these hesitations were about. So at that point in the conversation, we wanted to give people an overview. And so we sort of described that chart that I showed you, where you're comparing constructive journalism to breaking news, investigative news. And also we described specifically these three examples, the debate concept, the Indonesian audience-led project, and just that idea of asking one more question in an interview. Okay, this is what we're talking about. What do you think? And so I want to share with you how people responded to that description. So the different things that they called out in response to that. First and foremost, they really honed in on the value of ordinary voices and wanting more of that, and the idea of enabling civic dialogue. And I think at this point, I can see it can't be a free-for-all like social media, but anyone can come to the table if they have something constructive to say. So you have this we're used to this sort of open forum of social media, but if it is moderated and constructive and yet still pulling in all these different voices, that's very interesting. This was something, get people off the sidelines. So I want to really emphasize that as, because we traditionally, when we think about the role of journalism and democracy, we're looking at holding people in power into account. And obviously that's important, but this point to me is something different. So people were describing I had one person describe to me, it's like we're on the sidelines, or, you know, we're watching a parade go by. So there's nothing we can really do to affect what's going to happen. You know, we're just sort of watching it pass by. And even in these conversations, when people would say, thank you for asking me, I haven't thought about these questions like this before. And they were actually enjoying these conversations, talking about these ideas. Now they're paying attention in a different way. And so this process of asking, getting them engaged, I just think there's something to it in terms of our role as journalists in a democracy. All of a sudden, you have a stake, you have a voice in a different way. Even if you're not going to run for office, you know, you're not in the middle of it. People, I mean, I'm thinking about this third point really from a branding perspective, and how people described how it would change their relationship with that media outlet. So again, this is kind of a brand question, but they described how they would engage more, they would respect that outlet more and be more loyal. These were some of the ways they would look at that organization in a different way if this is what they were doing. People did obviously call out the opportunity to solve problems and bring people together in real life. But yeah, I think this was important too. They also saw number of people mentioned, like, I don't really think you would change anybody's mind in some of these gatherings, but they would hear each other. And so just seeing value in that, I think, was interesting. Yeah, this quote, I just, you know, I know, you know, as journalists, when you hear somebody say something, sometimes it's like this golden quote. A steady diet of hope would do wonders for our community. I was like, wow, that is beautiful. And then, but yeah, and then again, we definitely had someone who was like, I'm just not really interested. I'm going to make my own decisions about what is true and what is happening. So I want to respect that as well. Okay. So, getting on time here. These were some of the people came back to us with different ideas that they thought as examples of, I think this would work well in this type of format. So we definitely had a lot of people talk about the city of Jackson and just your challenges there. And again, I'm not there, but I did hear about an event that a couple of people described where people were coming together in a way that doesn't happen a lot. And just the value of that kind of interaction. People talked a lot about, again, the causes of local crime and violence, and how hard it is to have a view on that from the outside, which is normally, you know, where we're working as a journalist, trying to get into the middle to see what's really going on. Yeah, so again, some of those other local story ideas, finding a job after prison, school shootings, the impacts of the hospital closures, lots of all these topics that we're used to covering anyway. People were connecting, oh yeah, I would love to see this covered in this way. So again, we'll have all these for you guys. I'm sure you would think of many, many more. So yeah, that's the big picture of what we learned from the audience. And so we were really at this stage looking for what are these examples doing, and what is our audience saying that they want to see. And so we wanted to offer these as those intersection points that we would offer as themes, valuing those ordinary voices to shape the reporting and not just add quotes, being a visible member of the community that you cover, or training local people as reporters, facilitating civic dialogue and then covering it, stealing ideas from other industries and finding unexpected angles, adding hope and inspiration while at the same time tackling serious subjects, giving people helpful information and context in a way that meets them where they are. And then finally, addressing contentious topics by helping people hear each other and see shades of gray. So this is kind of what we've got, is those intersection points, and we really want to know, like, what do you think, and hear more from you guys about those resource gaps that you see in terms of being able to work this way. I would love, and maybe ways that you're already doing this. I know a lot of you are already do a lot of these things, so I would love to hear those as well.
Hi there, Lucy.
Hey, how are you?
Hey, Ladybug. Look, that last point that you made is so powerful. I think it really is the culmination of where the discourse is when it comes to media and just being contentious instead of trying to find that gray area. And when you're contentious and people are hot-headed, you just stop hearing either side. The second point I want to make is I love the boots on the ground approach when it comes to media and hearing from voices outside of media and just everyday men and women who are just involved in the community, trying to do a little positive work as the boots on the ground and giving them a voice and understanding that there's not my version of the truth or your truth. There's only the truth. And if we can agree on that truth, I think we can continue to grow and meet, like you said, people where they are as it pertains to where they get their media from, their news and things of that nature. So the public discourse is just ugly. I'm one of those ones who don't really take in a whole lot of news. I listen to a lot of Democracy Now! And NPR and PBS and all that kind of thing, but it's really refreshing to see the ideas. And I think the last one really pulls everything together. That last idea about not allowing things to be so contentious and you can't even communicate. It gets so ugly. Another word I'd like to introduce is the principle of deliberative dialogue. Be deliberate, be intentional, and open yourself up a little bit because no one of us has the answer, but I think if we come together, we can bridge that gap and life can be a lot easier in our state as it pertains to outlets and media. So I didn't mean to get on my soapbox, but I just wanted to say
That's
that.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you. And that actually gets to
Yes.
a point. It's really a sincere question that I have as a
Yes.
Southerner and a Mississippian deliberative dialogue. So I know
Yes.
here in Mississippi we have the gear where we can have big dramatic blowups, and I know we
Right.
have the gear where we just don't talk about it.
Exactly.
Do we have this
Exactly.
gear? Like, I'm sincerely asking this question because I
Right.
don't know.
Well,
Do we
yeah.
have it?
That's a good question. Well, I'm a military brat, Lisa. So, I've traveled all over the country. I've lived in Germany, to Miss Kimberly's point. And Germany is a very diverse country. We lived off the economy. I was in school there. There are a lot of intersectionality of races. I didn't realize there's so much interracial marriage in Germany. It's like a melting pot. It reminds me of the city of Hattiesburg. It really does. It's a lot of ebb and flow of different people's backgrounds and religions and races, and it's a beautiful thing. Yeah, Germany's really come a long way. And I was an 80s baby, so I was there during when the Berlin Wall fell. And my dad was on just pins and needles. He was just nervous because it was a powder keg, during that time. But it has come a long way, much like Mississippi, yet a ways to go. But yeah, I think we can find that gear. And I really believe if we pull in young people, get young people involved in that conversation, because a lot of times they get left behind. They don't have any money. They're unemployed. They're walking around with their pants sagging the ground. But some of those babies have the answer to societal issues that we have if we would just empower them and give them a voice.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Lucy, I'll say that a couple of times in my life, I was forced by a teacher, both times by a teacher, to go and explore the opposite point of view and be prepared to argue it so that I could win the argument either direction. And it's basic debate, but it really was very instructive to me to remember, to be reminded, we all should at least understand the other side of an argument, assuming that there's a side, so that we can just not repeat the same tropes that we've come up with in our head, or the comfort space that we feel like, okay, now I understand this issue. And I was reminded about one of those examples that they gave about the people who volunteered to go sit down for a year with somebody who was their polar opposite in politics and opinions.
I don't think it was a year.
It was
like
wild.
a meeting, a coffee.
It was a while. You had to actually have several interactions with this person to get to know them and try better to understand their perspective, even if it doesn't change your own opinion or your mind. But just being able to sit in someone else's chair for a little while to say, I at least think that I understand more about the facts of what you face. And the interpretation of that, of course, is different. But I feel like that's where we've really lost. Nobody's really curious about other people anymore. We seek out folks who think a lot like us, and then once we find them, the algorithm just keeps us in our same little bubble. So I think it has become incumbent really on several different things, whether it's philanthropy, nonprofits, or journalism, to say, and journalism is kind of both of those things these days, but I think we have to retrain ourselves, and then we have to sort of remind folks and make the place and the space for people to say, if you're willing, we can't force people to it, but if you're willing to do a little bit of exploration, here's some safe space and some ways to do that might at least, get some more understanding. Because I just, when I hear things or read things, and it's like, even in just normal news stories, I wonder, why did they pick that person? Like, what is it that made that person as a source better than this other person as a source? And you can learn a lot from a point of view as to who they're quoting.
Because they're the one that called you back on deadline.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's like, okay,
you got to get this. You got to get it done. You got to get.
It was good for that last minute quote. Even that, is important. I think we've done a lot where we see this person didn't respond in time for the press. Okay, well, I can live with that, but are you going to keep trying to go get their opinion or their quote at some point? Or is it just like, okay, that story's done, we're just going to throw it out now and we're done with this and we'll move on? I just kind of feel like that's the extra mile stuff that we don't have a lot of time and money to do anymore.
For sure. I would, and I would love to hear from the media community about some ways that you guys are already feel like you're doing some of these things to a certain extent. I know we have a lot to learn from each other. I would love to hear anybody who, can express how you're already working in some of these ways and what that looks like for you.
Well, I can, I want to kind of follow up on what Jane is saying, and it's talking about also, we've done in one way or another, I've already mentioned this, but we do what we call solution circles, which kind of grew out of a summit, a Solutions Journalism Network summit that I went to, and it was this model sort of that they were using, and then we named it Solution Circles. But the idea is that we're convening people to talk about different issues, or to come up with the issues themselves. Different circles do things differently. But the bottom line is that the journalists who are there are only there to listen and basically keep the conversation going in whatever way, tell people to pass the talking stick or, whatever we need to do. But I think what we've learned through those circles, and there's a lot more to say about the circles, and they're going physical. We've done a lot of virtual ones since the pandemic started and since MFP launched, but we're about to launch physical circles this fall. But to her point, though, Jane's, is that I think one of the things as journalists that we can really start to wrap our arms around and our heads around is the fact that the people that we often are covering, or who are driving the often two-sided binary that is up in our coverage, they don't represent everybody, even if they claim to. And what you find, I think, when you get into conversations like these, is that people want to talk to each other a lot more than we think they do. But they don't feel like they have the opportunities for that. And they don't fall easily into these two sides that are both media narratives and certainly political divisions that are very purposeful, me versus him kind of thing. And I'll give you all a quick example. I was in I was down south just last week, I think it was, doing some reporting. And I was talking to a woman who is leaving a state legislature, who is a Republican, who is talking about an issue, and she is leaving because it's so stratified, that even though she wants to be a Republican, it's not like she's trying to change party, but she's so frustrated at the culture war kinds of conversations that it's just driving her out of politics. And she's kind of a natural leader and a very interesting woman. And she agrees with Democrats on certain issues. But my point is that there are people even inside politics, and certainly in the echo chamber that is social media, those are the things that are driving way too much of our conversations, and in many cases our reporting, I think. And so that's kind of why over the years we have kind of, and Kimberly and I agree on this, we want to really get other people together and not make assumptions about them, and not divide them into two pots of people, who are necessarily going to disagree on everything. Because I think what we find is that when we get people in the same room, the human aspect kicks in, and then it can become a very different thing. Now, there are challenges getting everybody in the room. This is one of the things we're wrestling with as we go forward, and getting some help on through a new grant. But we're trying to figure out how to get more people into the room, more different kinds of people, concentric circles, if you will, so that more and more people are coming into the room. And now one of the things that we're really trying is to really kind of stay away from politicians as much as possible and officialdom. Sure, if someone in those positions come to the circle, they're equal to everybody else. They are not at the front of a room. There are no experts, right? That's very important to the circle dynamic. And to get more people who, if they are not dominating the conversations, we found that people are much more open to just talking to each other. So I could go on about this, but that's kind of where we are right now, is that we're really pulling away from experts and officialdom for these conversations.
Yeah, no, thank you, Donna. I'm going to pick up on a couple of things that you said. And I think, a number of people mentioned the trust part of how they would relate to a media outlet trying to be in this role, and also questioning, okay, but can that media outlet pull off being perceived as a neutral facilitator for this? So I think that's a question. You saw with the put 4 people in a shrinking room example, they really had to convince them that they didn't want them to fight. But I think your question is really interesting in terms of, again, is this dimension of democracy? Who's willing to step into that? If this is going to be contentious, would I run for office? No. There's a lot of us who are not willing to take that kind of step, because you anticipate you're going to have this sort of relationship with the media pitting you against other people, and you just don't want to do that. What I had, one person who was in the legislature, her statement was to have the press as a partner. That would be huge, actually helping us understand the dimensions of different things and see these different perspectives. Like, yes, the pushback is, they definitely said the pushback is important, but what if additionally we're really looking at the press, not just the trying to catch us, but they're wanting to inspire us? That's really a different kind of idea. How would that change our, a lot of us, the willingness to even put ourselves out there and run for office? I don't have the answer to that. It's just a question based on your observation. What else? Other examples that that you guys are thinking of, or things to process?
Well, this is Jerry Mitchell.
Hey, Jerry. Thank you.
Oh, I think that, I think the idea, it's kind of somewhat, I'm pushed back a little bit. The idea on constructive journalism is somehow different than investigative reporting, that they were somehow in conflict, or, because good investigative reporting can help bring change. I mean, I've
Mhm.
seen it over and over again. So it's,
For sure.
I don't think investigative reporting is contrary necessarily to constructive journalism, if that makes sense. Like, I think it's kind of almost kind of creating a little bit of a false dichotomy, which I don't think really necessarily exists, because we've got to understand we have a problem. We've got, as someone mentioned before, we've got to know the truth before we can begin to solve those particular issues. And I think that's, that's why I think investigative reporting plays a critical role in these things, because often we don't know. I think that's one of the big problems is Mississippi has these huge news deserts, where I'm talking about local communities. You saw that in the comments from people. They want to know more about what's going on in their community, but a lot of times it's not being covered, and things like that. So I guess what I want to say is I just want to push back slightly in the idea that investigative reporting can be constructive, as well as bringing together people to talk, certainly. But I think you have to understand there's a problem, and there has to be begin to be an agreement that there's an issue or problem before you kind of bring people together, if that makes sense. I mean, but I've seen investigative reporting help bring, we when I was at the Clarion Ledger, we did this huge expose series on the health department, and they basically wound up, this 2006, 2007, they wound up kicking out the head of the Department of Health in the entire state board of health and started over. And that led to, very good changes at the health department. So I think that if you follow what I'm saying, I think that it's not necessarily at odds. And the other thing I'd point out about the survey is I think that what's going on nationally obviously is affecting everyone, but I think there's such a blurring, especially at the national level, of news and opinion, that the average person doesn't perceive that, if you know what I mean. Like, you have talk shows, whether it's Fox or MSNBC or CNN or whoever it is, you have these talk shows, they're not labeled as opinion like editorial pages used to be. In newspapers typically have that, and they're clearly labeled as opinion. And I think that leads to a blurring of understanding of people, what's fact and what's opinion, and those kinds of things. So there's a lot of work to be done in this area, obviously. So
for sure, I would even amplify what you said, Jerry. I after working through all this and looking at all this, I don't really think you can do constructive journalism unless you also have the critical dimension. I think those two have to go together. So I think, again, when we first kind of looked at that chart, threw us off a little bit, some of the, the goal being blame, looking at investigative in that column. I think we wouldn't necessarily choose those words. I think the intention is more like, how do you add this additional dimension? Like you say, good reporting is already doing this already when you have the resources to go that deep.
No, I agree.
But I think they can't be separate. Otherwise, it's just good news. And then,
I'll give another example. Medicare expansion. We started reporting about this. Mississippi Today has reported on this extensively, of Medicare expansion. We started reporting on that, several years ago, and just really, and people didn't, when they did surveys in Mississippi, most people didn't, there were a lot of people didn't have an opinion one way or the other. And now the latest surveys, I think it's like 70-something% of people in Mississippi support Medicaid expansion. So why is that? Well, people didn't have the information. They needed to know more about the issue, and there still needs to be more discussion. But I think that indicates a role that we can play is informing the public as well. That maybe they don't. There's just not something they've talked about. The legislature hadn't debated it when we started writing about this, not much. And anyway, I think that's critical as well.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with everything you're saying, Jerry. I will pick up just one. You mentioned, the blurring between opinion you know, and what we think is traditional editorial. And that was really clear when you had the opinion page. We would have people, you know, in the print publication who would be confused, you know, readers who couldn't tell an ad from a story, you know, so just the level. Yeah, of course, we're confused by how all this, you know, flows together today. Absolutely. Let's see. Anything else? Any other questions or comments that we want to bring out today? Let me just jump into. I wanted to share with you. Whoops. Let me go forward instead of backward. So we haven't done a lot of like, this is the next step, because we really sincerely want to hear from this community before we figure out, you know, where we should take this. We really want to orient this around these next steps around who's interested and how can we help. Some of the ideas that we have, we did want to share those with you. So we're really, I mean, that again, the gap between us and training is happening in Europe, that's a real thing. So we would love to figure out how to bring more access to these ideas and examples in terms of virtual meetings or in-person opportunities to gather together and look at examples and talk through some of these ideas. We're very interested in that. Ulrich has told us he is up for coming to Mississippi if we want to bring him. So I think that would be, that's definitely something that we're talking about. If you guys also agree that would be interesting. So some sort of conference or mini tour. I mean, we all know how big this state is and the challenge of trying to get everybody in one place. So we're open to that idea. We also really want to hear like, you know, specific opportunities that you guys see on the ground and what those gaps are. So, I mean, again, I'm not going to speak for our partners at the Community Foundation, but the way that there's a lot of philanthropy wanting to make an impact around journalism, and there's a lot of need. So those sorts of opportunities to put those things together. I think we're really open to hearing about those kinds of opportunities. And then finally, you know, I would sincerely love to be able to create for this media community the kind of resources and models and best practices, you know, building that out, and also importantly, not just in a one-way kind of conversation, but being able to, you know, to use different tools to have more of a feedback loop where we can put something out there and then hear back from y'all and sort of recycle those insights. I think that to me would make a lot of sense, and I would like to create something that doesn't require you to always be at a certain place at a certain time, but that you could access as you're able to, and just coming from a place of knowing how pressed you are for time and wanting to make it easy to step in and get caught up and kind of find at your fingertips the resources that you're looking for. That to me would have a lot of value as a reporter. Do you want to talk a little bit about the Jackson Association of Neighborhoods, Sophie?
Yeah, I'll talk on it briefly. I know we're getting close to the end of time, but really in doing some of this research and then also seeing some gaps that were, of course, happening here in our own community here in Jackson, particularly with a lot of news going statewide, and there not necessarily being the same level of local journalism that used to exist here in Jackson. We started to explore with the Jackson Association of Neighborhoods. We're creating a content creator that will help bring this local knowledge back to the neighborhood level. Just for some background, I'm also a former journalist who also had a kind of media organization with my husband for almost 10 years about a specific neighborhood here in Jackson. So I'm going to help mentor this person with Jan, and I'm on their communications committee who's going to oversee this role. But really, it's about all the things that we've talked about getting connected to where you live and how that is connected to community pride, about having someone with boots on the ground and reporting from inside the community, and really asking the question of what stories are not being told and helping neighborhoods own and reclaim their own narrative. A lot of these neighborhoods don't even have their own websites to share their own information, and there's a lot of questions about how do you even make that happen for these neighborhoods. So I've already started creating this website for all of this information, and where we will actually do some train the trainer and equip non-journalists. So we will be taking some of the examples like Greater Govan Hill and taking some pieces from that and figuring out how can we infuse constructive journalism into what we are doing with this content creator and really just journalism as a whole on a local level, and embed this person in community and create an information network. That's going to be really important. We've seen that time and time again lately with Jackson, particularly during crisis. How can information spread, particularly on the neighborhood level? Jackson Association of Neighborhoods is really an association of associations. A lot of the people involved are neighborhood leaders, but even the neighborhood leaders need the information and then need to spread that on to others. So we're really looking at how to create that network, but also teach them to also tell the stories of their neighborhood and be able to have a place where they can put it, because that has been a barrier in the past. So all of that will come to fruition, and that the deadline actually to apply for that job is this Friday, the 22nd. So if you know anybody who would fit to help us do that work, the application is online. I'll put a link in the chat, but we would love for you to pass that along if you have anybody that would help us along with that work.
Thank you, Sophie. Okay, so in terms of what's next, please be on the lookout for an email survey. It would help us. We really want to hear from as many people as we can, and it will help us organize that information. We'll package together a video of this presentation, for you guys and anyone else who missed it. And then we really want to hear your thoughts, if you can respond to us in that way. We want to be able to keep you posted and also hear from you about what would have value to you as we're looking at events in the new year for what we want to try to put together. We will be using email, so sorry, can you all still hear me? Okay. Yeah. So you can add yourself and pass that along. Going to continue using the site landing page. We'll continue adding new things there. I will be sharing things on LinkedIn as well as Sophie. And feel free when we send this email out, forward it to anybody you think would be interested in. We really want to create a feedback loop. So that's the goal, not just sort of a one-way distribution of content, but this ability to also continue listening from you guys to you guys about what you need. Anything else, Sophie or Jane? Wrap it up.
Yeah, I just want to mention that you cut out a little bit right there at the end, but I'll just reiterate that we will be doing a lot of email communication, at least for this kind of first stage. So you will get the video link afterwards, and then we really hope to encourage you to take the survey. We would love to hear from you and want to stay connected, and feel free to share that video with others. But we have some exciting things we hope will happen in the spring of 2024. Lucy mentioned kind of a mini tour of sorts, where we hope to kind of continue this conversation about constructive journalism and hopefully bring Ulrich over. So we want you guys to stay connected to hear more as that develops.
Yeah, and I'll just add my thanks to everybody for coming. We had one question about the content creator position, whether it's full or part-time, and I think the answer is yes. I mean, there's some leeway to work with the right person to decide if this is a contract position or more than that. We've tried to be fairly flexible in the design of the position with Jan. So please just encourage anybody to go fill out the application. But thank you all, and please keep us connected. If you'll just answer the survey, we're looking forward to learning from you guys. So thanks for being here.
Thank you, everybody.